It's an honor to be here. It's quite a pleasure, actually, to spend my time here in a sabbatical here at Duke. I'm really excited about it all. I want to learn as much as I possibly can, absorb things like a sponge, meet people, make connections, and hopefully get some long-term collaborations with people that share my interest. Here's some of my background, and I think Dr. Jackson talked mostly about the top part here. And my goal here on my sabbatical is to learn LCA, energy, environment, and other things to broaden myself. And I really would love to interact with all those that are interested in coming and discussing things, and then develop collaborations. So that's what I'm here for. As I came onto my sabbatical, my regular job is bang, 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 bang. There's so many things that are happening to me and I'm doing. I really don't get time to sit back and just think about things. And I was doing some reading actually my first week, and I came up with these two quotes right here. They're kind of two different opinions about what might happen to our future. Okay? One of them's a little bit positive and one of them's a little bit negative. The first one talks about us using our brains and our thinking and our creative powers to build what we need to build to survive in the upcoming years after we become industrialized. And then the second one is a little bit more sour. It talks about some of the impossibilities, seemingly, that exist, and that there might be an environmental catastrophe. So you can look at it both different ways, and they kind of hit me as one way I kind of like and one way I don't like. But anyway, that's kind of what I'm couching this 6 months, and I really want to, just kind of learn things more than just nuts and bolts. And so my point is biofuels. How does it fit into these two comments? Does it fit in? Where does it fit in? Okay. So I'd like to just introduce you to what I know about biofuels, some of the challenges, what we are doing at NC State to try to address some of those challenges. What we do at NC State is there's a vast array of technologies and materials. We try to pick the ones that have high potential and examine those carefully and look for critical mechanisms that would make these better. So we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing at NC State, and then I'll talk about 3 projects that we're involved with. And actually, let me introduce this is Jesse Daystar. He's a graduate student in my program, and Ronald Gonzalez is a new postdoc in my program also, and I'm going to be showing you some of their research today. So they can also answer questions and things like that. So where is biofuels right now? If you take a look at all the energy that we consume in the U.S., what you'll see is that renewable energy as of 2005 was about 6%. Biofuels was only about half of that. So really, it's a very, very tiny component, okay? And I think the positive thinkers amongst us would say, how does that renewable energy portion of the pie, how do we grow that? How do we make that more important? How big can it get? Can it effectively get big enough to help society in a significant way? Okay, but currently, right now, it's a very small part of the pie. Okay, but the U.S. government has some grand plans for renewable fuels. Okay, and in fact, here, the 2007 Energy Independence and Security Act basically says that we've got a goal, and part of that goal is actually 16 billion gallons of biofuel that comes from probably the hardest source, lignocellulosic materials, to convert into, let's say, ethanol or other fuels. So this is a huge challenge. And this is what we're trying to address at NC State, and other people are too. Okay? 16 billion gallons, and we're already behind schedule. So 2010, we were supposed to have this much. There's really no commercial industrial plant at this point producing biofuels from lignocellulosics in a significant way. So we're already behind. Okay. Some of the challenges of biofuels. Why is it so small right now? Well, it's small because of just natural things, supply and demand, market, economics. Well, let me talk to you about some of those challenges, what makes it so difficult. For instance, one of the challenges is the land mass required. Okay, we all want to conserve land, use it in the best way, and if you just compare, if we took San Jose, California, which has about a population of about 1 million, and we said, okay, what is the power needed to supply that city with what it needs? And we look at something like natural gas. So if we were to produce natural gas and use it to fulfill all of San Jose's energy requirements, it would take that land area. Compare that to biomass, okay? And San Jose is just one city, okay? And we're looking at this kind of area. And that's an issue. That is a serious, serious problem for biomass. It doesn't happen when we look at natural gas, nuclear, coal, hydroelectric, these kinds of things. Okay. All right, here's another challenge, okay? To make a significant impact in greenhouse gases, people have said, okay, let's go ahead and use biofuels. This might make an impact. Okay, so this International Energy Agency said, okay, well, what will we need? How much biofuels will we need to make an impact? Let's say we wanted to cut 50% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2050, okay? What would we have to do? Well, the calculations show that we would have to use this much material of biomass, okay? So if you take a look at that, these are the volumes in billions of cubic meters to cut 50% reduction of greenhouse gases, okay? Now, to put that in perspective, take a look at this number right here. This is the 2010 world grain volume. So the whole entire world has a capacity right now only to process about 2 billion cubic meters per year of grain. Okay, let's compare that with coal. Coal and oil. All of our consumption right now just needs about this much volume. So we're talking about massive, massive, massive volumes. We've got to have all that infrastructure in place in order to make that 50% reduction. Okay. In the United States, the USDA, part of that Energy Act that I was talking about, was one of its goals was to replace 30% of the petroleum consumption in the U.S. The estimate was 1 billion oven-dry tons of biomass would be needed to do that. Okay, so, and they made some calculations. It would take 360 million oven-dry tons per year of forest biomaterials out of the 8.4 billion that are standing right now. That's a significant fraction. And then from the agricultural waste, they basically suggested that we take about 1 million out of the, this should be 1.2 million tons. That should not be billion. Oh, no, that's actually right. So I have to check that. But I think it was almost let me see. I can't recall if that was 1 million. I think that was 1.2 million tons available per year. So you have to take almost 100% of the agricultural residue. Now the problem with all this is that the economics that were done here weren't really done. They assumed yield increases due to new technology that would cost more money. They assumed no tillage and kind of brushed under the rug the fact that there's soil issues. Changing crop and land uses were assumed. So there was a lot of stuff going on here just to get that 1 billion oven-dry tons to meet the 30% petroleum consumption. So again, it just shows you how much we need. Another problem with biomass is it's got a low density for energy. So the energy content per volume is very, very small. Okay, let's compare agricultural residues, which have a volumetric energy content of energy per cubic meter of around 2. If we compare that to coal, it's between 11 and 33. Let's say it's 20. So for instance, if you needed to ship a certain amount of material to get you some energy, you would have to ship 10 truckloads of agricultural residue compared to 1 truckload of coal. Just as an example, think about all the gasoline you'd need. Think about all the trucks you'd have to maintain, the traffic on the roads. That's a significant problem with biofuels. Okay, another problem that people don't like is solids handling. As a chemical engineer, almost every lecture we went into had a heat exchanger with liquids flowing through it, a pump with liquid flowing through it, a reaction in the liquid phase. We love those, all those things. We love liquids. Petroleum is perfectly suited for that. We don't have that with biomass all the time. We've got solids, and solids have all kinds of problems. When we try to transport it, break it down, measure it, dose it, they're all problematic and very difficult. Storage conditions can be very important. The material can decay due to temperature, light, microorganisms, It's moisture sensitive and temperature sensitive. So we've got to store it, and that costs a lot of money also. And then we already mentioned the low bulk density. As an example, this graph shows feed moisture content of, let's say, of agricultural residue that comes in. And if we were to process it, let's say in a thermal conversion plant, where we're converting it to energy, basically this axis right here shows you the percent of the feed energy available to make energy. So we have to do two things. We have to dry the material, and then we can make energy with the dried material if we theoretically break it up that way. And what you see is that as the moisture content of the biomass goes up from 0 to 80%, which is not abnormal, the energy, the feed energy available for actually making energy decreases rapidly. Okay? And so just one example of if we've got to store it under sheds and keep it dry, there's expenses to that, but it has a significant effect. Okay, so how might the current forest products industry fit in? I would tell you that I'm in a paper science department, and I'm very excited about the paper industry. We have an incredibly elegant and effective way to convert biomass, and I'll show you that. Okay, so when we, in our department, think about biomass, we typically generally start off with wood. And we say, well, what are the usable parts of wood that are in there? We have lignin, cellulose, hemicellulose, and extractives. Those are the four main components that we get in almost all types of wood. Now, the cellulose is a high polymer. It's got a very long, it's a very long chain polymer, and we can derivatize it, make plastics, films. We can make paper out of it. So it has what I would call polymer value, a pretty high material value. Hemicellulose, on the other hand, is another carbohydrate, comes in wood at about 25%. It has a much lower DP. Its degree of polymerization is 150. There are many different types of sugars that are typically in a hemicellulose, 5-membered rings, 6-membered rings. And basically I would say it's got sugar value, which is lower than polymer value. This sugar value might be go into a biofuel, but it has a lower value. We want to harvest this and use this for biofuels or biomaterials. I'll talk to you about how we can upgrade this. And then finally, what wood has is lignin, and it's the adhesive, keeps that composite structure, that magical composite structure together. We try to, in our processes, degrade it and remove it so that we can get cellulose and hemicellulose to use. It's phenolic. It has a higher carbon-oxygen ratio than these two. We typically burn it for fuel. Okay, but it is actually a nice place to get starting chemicals for other things. But industrially, it's not used other than burning for fuel. So we try to think about these materials. And here's the wood to paper process. And I would tell you, it's just not as simple as wood to paper. It's a biorefinery. And we're getting a lot of very interesting products. So what we do is we take logs, we debark them, we chip them, then we treat them with sodium sulfide and sodium hydroxide, a digester. And what that does is it degrades the lignin. It solubilizes that lignin that I was talking about, and it removes that so that we can defiberize the material. And so out of this digester, high temperature, high pressure, and these cooking chemicals, we actually get the fibers, and those fibers actually are washed and screened, and then we bleach them, and then we make white paper out of it. And that's our main product right there. But it's a real clever process. What we do here in this washing is we wash away all the dissolved lignin and some of the hemicellulose. We evaporate it, thicken it, and then we send it to what's called a recovery boiler. We get steam and energy, and then we take that recovery boiler product, the inorganics, we do a little bit of trickery here, and then we regenerate our white liquor, our cooking chemicals. So it's a beautiful loop right here. It can be very highly efficient. So we use the lignin and hemicellulose here as power. In this cooking process, we harvest turpentine. In this when we evaporate water, we harvest fatty acids. So we're using it all. And what the paper industry must do in the future is to extend this kind of strategy. We want to increase the value of all the products that we make. We want to make biofuels. This has energy right here, but we'd also like to make biofuels. Please stop me if you have any questions or there's something confusing. Let me just see. Okay, I've got some dynamics here. Currently, the wood processing industry, we actually consume fossil fuel and power, and we emit a net amount of carbon dioxide as we make our products. What is the future? We propose, if my arrows could come on here, that what we do is we modify our processes to use gasification and some more effective ways of converting organic material to power. And what that should do for us is we should start to be able to produce biofuels and chemicals. And the net result of that and this displacement of petroleum materials should make our net CO2 be actually negative. So we're actually taking in CO2 rather than emitting an extra amount. For the paper industry, the economics are great. So currently we have $5.5 billion in paper product value. And what this proposal is to reinvent this and increase that biofuels revenue. Well, generate a $17 billion biofuels revenue. So it's a pretty exciting time in our world. Okay? All right. So how are we going to do that biorefinery? I want to show you some examples of what we're doing at NC State to get to that goal, higher valued fuels and things like that. So the Department of Forest Biomaterials. So the bioenergy program, we're actually a little university in ourselves. We have biotech people. We have chemists. We have engineers. We have economics people. So we all come together, multidisciplinary. We collaborate on a lot of projects together, and we develop new things that way. So those are some of the people that are involved in these projects. Here's a list of projects. All of these are funded. Most of them have a graduate student or a postdoc on them, and they range from pilot plant work to processing work to life cycle analysis, economics, and then lab scale things like torrefaction, gasification, producing ethanol from different materials like hemicellulose. So we have a very large host and varied group of projects there. Let me mention a couple of them.
Before you go on, may I ask,
yes.
What's the transgenic tree? Is that poplar or is that?
That is.
Or is it? What?
That's aspen.
Oh, you're going to get to that.
Yeah, I will get to that. 2 slides. So basically, here's one project that I want to talk to you about, the Wood to Ethanol Research Consortium. The paper industry in the last 10 or 15 years has idled about 25% of its capacity. That is significant. Basically, what that is if you took that much capacity, which is about 50 million tons per year of wood processing, and you said, I want to convert that to a biofuels, that would have the potential to create 4 billion gallons of ethanol. Okay, that's just sitting there. It's already been paid for. It's good equipment. It's just sitting there. So here's the concept. We take an old kraft pulp mill and repurpose it as an ethanol mill. Okay? What's so great about that? Well, basically a pulp mill costs about $1 billion in capital. Maybe a lot more now. If you had to get licensing and meet all the environmental requirements and things like that, we might be talking about $1.5 billion for one mill. It's already there. We have to take advantage of that. So there's a consortium of several companies, including Chevron and Weyerhaeuser engineering companies, that are involved in this consortium. So basically, here's the advantage. Here's an existing kraft mill, and here are all those operations that I quickly taught you about. The wood yard, the digesters, the washers, the screens, all this stuff. To convert this type of process, which already has boilers, already has utilities, already has reactors and pumps and all those things, all we would need to do is add this blue equipment right here. So we'd have to add a couple more reactors, a fermenter, a bear column, a distillation column, and maybe some dehydration. So with some slight modifications, we can utilize this $1 billion of capital and make a ethanol mill. And this is one of the ways to decrease capital costs and actually make biofuel ethanol economically viable. Okay? And we have to be clever about it. We need to figure out good ways to convert cellulose and other carbohydrates into monosugars for fermentation. Okay. Another project I would mention is just a little different, is the transgenic hardwoods. Okay, so in this project, the idea here is that if you take cellulosic material like wood and you try to treat it with enzyme hydrolysis, with enzymes, what you'll find out is you'll get low sugar yields. You might get 30%, 40%, whatever. But that material is recalcitrant. Nature makes that wood and things about that wood recalcitrant so trees can fight off the things that are in nature. Okay? So we need to pre-treat that wood with alkali acid and things like that. Those are costs and are expensive. So here's the idea. What we'll do is we'll develop transgenic hardwoods. We will modify some of the genes that exist in these materials. Okay? So we'll suppress the activities of some of these genes. And two of these genes, so what's happened is when we suppress the operation of those two genes, one thing we find out is that the trees grow faster. That's nice. That's nice. If everything else is constant, that's nice. But the other thing that we can do when those genes are modified is we can actually reduce the amount of lignin that's in that tree. Now that lignin is that cross-link material, and it's part of the problem with the recalcitrance of our conversion. So that one gene actually can reduce the lignin content from 24 to 11%. Okay? Now another one of the genes can actually, that lignin actually comes in two forms, an S form and a G form. Okay? And one form is more recalcitrant than the other. What we can do actually is change the S to G ratio from 2.2 to 6.4. So we can modify not only the concentration of lignin, but the type of lignin that exists in there. What is the net result? Okay, if you take a look at a wild type aspen, we get about 40 grams of sugar with a standard enzyme treatment to hydrolyze to make sugar. If we use the TG21-25, basically what we have is we have 17% lignin, and we can get a higher sugar yield from that enzyme hydrolysis. Then if we take that, we reduce the lignin to 11% and also change the S to G ratio, then we can get a 52.2 grams per 100 gram of wood. So we can see that these modifications can actually make our other operations much more effective. Yes?
When you say the increased biomass, is that in greenhouse conditions or in field conditions?
Yeah, that's in greenhouse conditions. I'm going to estimate that they have trees of 3 to 5 years old at this point. And
so, I guess my question is that it sounded like some of the genetic modifications you're making were related to, say, potentially the plant defenses and other pests or something along those lines.
That's
so
right.
If these plants don't have those defenses, what are the consequences for that for growth in natural conditions?
Yeah, we don't have the answers for that at this point. They're in pretty tightly held, enclosed growing conditions. So putting them out in the wild is one of the issues. Yeah, that's not known. Everyone thought that, a lot of people bantered around the idea that we'd grow these trees without the lignin and they'd be soft like elastic bands and they'd be just laying over and we'd have all this problem climbing over tree after tree as we go through the woods. Don't know if that's going to happen or anything like that. But this is definitely a nice way to complement some of the other parts of our research in our department. Okay, let's get really low tech. For biofuels to work, we need cheap materials. Wouldn't it be good if we could take our wastes and convert those to biofuels? And a lot of the ideas are taking waste paper, taking industrial sludge, taking municipal waste, taking water treatment sludges. All these things have carbohydrates. All these carbohydrates can be converted into ethanol. So we also have projects on that. And the negative feedstock cost is a real plus in these cases. Okay. All right. What I want to do is take a look at 3 projects that we're working on, just to give you a flavor, a little bit more detail about 3 things that show you our capability and give you a little bit of idea of what we think are potential areas where we can really make some hay. Okay, so we'll talk about integrated biomass supply and financial models. That's Ronald's work. Extraction of hemicellulose for higher valued products. I'm involved as one of the PIs for that project. And thermal conversion of biomass to liquid fuel and life cycle assessment that goes along with that. And that's what Jesse is working on right now as his master's thesis. Okay, first one, integrated biomass feedstock supply and financial models. none of this is going to work unless there's economic incentive for people to start working. And what Ronalds has done is has said, okay, this process is very complicated, and we have these multiple steps in series and parallel. We've got the growing of the biomass. We've got the harvesting of the biomass, the storage, the freight, the biorefinery. We've got different types of ways to process it, and what we want to know is which one of these are cost effective, which ones use land in an effective way, which biomasses should we use, which conversion processes should we use, based on economics. And so this is a pretty complicated area. Now, what Ronalds has been working on are models that talk about how is biomass available in the quantities that we need. And he's been using maps and data that describe where biomass is being grown. Where is it located in different places? So for instance, right here, this is near Bastrop, Louisiana. Here's a potential site where we might repurpose a paper mill for ethanol production. And the question becomes, is there enough biomass around this mill to supply this mill with enough to maybe make 5 million gallons or a bigger number? Okay? We know that there's a whole bunch of different types of biomass there. And we know that those different biomass have different fuel values, different carbohydrate concentrations, different energy densities, all these things. So the first thing we can do, Ronalds did, was he took these maps and he converted them into bone-dry tons of biomass in millions versus distance from this site. Okay, it has this matrix that tells you how much of this different biomass is available at different distances from the mill. Okay, now that kind of information is used to develop delivered cost of biomass. Okay, and so let me just kind of show you how that all works. This graph right here shows you some different types of biomass. Okay, and then basically what it tells you is the productivity of that material. So for instance, the productivity right here is in dry tons per hectare per year. Okay, so it tells you how much biomass you're producing, what's the density of the biomass that you're producing. And with that information, it also tells you if you want to make 500,000 dry tons per year, how much land would it require? And you can see that natural hardwoods would take a lot more land. But your children might like to run around in natural hardwoods. They might not want to run around in a field of miscanthus, or there might be other implications. So you've got natural hardwood that's taking a lot of land and corn stover, and these are taking less. Okay? But what you'll notice is that the density, the productivity of the land can be very different. Now, one of the ways that that causes a problem is that this blue right here is the productivity, the density. So we're making a lot of biomass in a very small area here, and basically the distance required to transport that to a processing facility is very small. And what you'll see is as that density of biomass decreases, the amount of distance that we have to travel increases a lot. The sourcing distance, how far out from the mill do we have to go on average to obtain that biomass? So that's a very significant thing. So one of the objectives is making our land more productive. If we can keep the environmental issues okay and things like that, for this aspect, we would like to do that. Now, how does that translate to something that that's practical? Now what you can see here is now through his models, he calculates a biomass delivered cost. Okay, so there's a storage biomass loss cost. So actually, if you store biomass, some of it degrades. So agricultural residues. So all of these agricultural grasses and agricultural residues, you see that there's a cost just because that biomass degrades in storage. There's a storage cost for the agricultural materials. Okay, wood, you can store it on the stump out in the forest. So that's an advantage of that. You also have freight costs. That freight cost is a combination of the distance you have to travel and the energy density or the carbohydrate density per unit volume. So that's different here too. And then you also have to pay for the biomass, whatever it costs for the biomass. And you can see that the differences between, let's say, sweet sorghum cane, $102 per dry ton, and loblolly pine are very much different. Okay, it has great implications for when we're trying to implement processing technology like that. Okay? Now that was just the biomass cost. You have to combine that with the cost to convert it. Okay? So you need to understand, okay, if I have a processing plant, what is the capital cost? What is the operating cost to run that? It's going to be different for different conversion types, and it's going to be different for different biomasses. So we combine the biomass costs with the operating and the capital costs of these pieces of equipment. And his models have shown that how the costs break down. So for instance here, in our processing costs, we have labor, we have depreciation, cost of enzymes. You can see that's very significant. So one of the things we'd like to do is make our enzymes more effective. Drop that down to 5% of the cost. Yeast for fermentation, chemicals, the biomass cost, and actually we're generating some net energy here, so we have a negative cost for the energy. So these are all costs during processing. And then the revenues that we get are the ethanol revenue. Here we're assuming $2 a gallon. The ethanol subsidy, $1 a gallon. If you add up these bars and these bars, what you'll see is that this is an example, and I picked a bad example, but it's just one example. This example is very unprofitable. Okay, it looks like all the costs all in total are about $6 a gallon, and the revenue is $3 a gallon. That's just one case, and we have cases that are very positive and very negative. Okay, but it just shows you that if you don't pick the right process, you can make a huge mistake. And so if you think about it, what does somebody have to do? They have to make $1 billion decision on purchasing some capital. And then they have to start it up and find out if it's profitable or not. Okay? It's a very significant question. Okay, that was one. So we can do economic modeling and supply type modeling. And Ronald's, I think, is going to continue that and incorporate that with LCA and Jesse's work. I want to show you another example of what we're doing with the biorefinery concept, and that is the use of hemicellulose. Okay? So what we're going to do is extract hemicellulose, and we're going to make ethanol possibly, or very valuable biopolymer gels out of that. So here's the idea. Here's a simplified paper making process. We take the wood chips. Now in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to extract instead of go right to our chemical reactions. The nice thing about this extraction is we can just use hot water. We can just use hot water. The hemicellulose is actually partly soluble in just simply hot water. Acids are actually formed when we heat this up at high temperature, and those acids accelerate it, but all we have to do is add hot water and we get hemicellulose out. The idea is we can make chemicals or we can make ethanol, perhaps. And then the remaining material goes on to make a paper product. Okay? So the hot water extraction, let me just kind of show you some results. What we did was we took about 100 grams of raw material. This is a hardwood. We added water to it, probably 6-to-1 ratio, 160 degrees Celsius for 1 hour. And what we get is the solids and then the soluble material. Bottom line is we can analyze that soluble material. We know exactly what kind of sugars we have. We've got a lot of xylan in there because it's a hardwood. And we can get about 10 grams of sugar for every 100 grams in our feed. Okay? And what we want to do in our research project is make that sugar very valuable. We can convert it into biofuels like ethanol. But can we make it into a polymer that society can use that will pay a lot more than just ethanol prices, $3 a gallon? So what we do is we modify that. We start off with our hemicellulose. Remember I told you it has a DP of 150. It's a pretty short chain. That's its average polymerization. And it's just got sugar value. What we're going to do is we'll cross-link it with two other somewhat benign green materials. We're going to use citric acid, and we'll react that citric acid, which is multifunctional. So we'll cross-link some of this hemicellulose. In doing that, we're increasing its molecular weight. We're forming a gel. Then, after that, what we're going to do is we'll use chitosan. And that chitosan is a polymer in itself, comes from seashells, comes from chitin. And basically we'll react that with our hemicellulose citrate. Okay? And what we form is a three-dimensional gel-type structure. Okay? So we've taken this sugar and we've made a gel polymer out of it. And let me just kind of tell you what some of the things we can do with that. Anybody have any questions about that? I'm not sure digesting all the reactions are important at this point, but just the idea, the concept that we're trying to use green chemistry, we're trying to use natural materials like citric acid and chitosan and hemicellulose, and we're making some personal products out of these things. Okay? So what do we come up with? After we dry that material, we come up with a very light, airy foam. Okay? We come up with an aerogel. What's interesting about it is we've taken 3 relatively brittle material. Hemicellulose is brittle. Citric acid is brittle. Chitosan is somewhat brittle. And we've put them together, combined them, and through our processing, we've made a flexible, elastic foam. Okay? So we've taken tree material and made something that's similar to polyurethane. It's a very nice product. Here's the postdoc actually applying it, and safety-wise, we would never allow this, but he's applied this to his hand just for picture's sake. I think he's okay. He's still okay. Okay, so what are these gels useful for? Well, one of the applications we wanted to use them was for diapers. Okay, we want to replace polyacrylic acid superabsorbent polymers that are in diapers with a wood-based material that's renewable. Okay, and so what we did was we did some water absorption experiments, and what we found out was very disappointingly that we were only able to absorb about 1,520% by weight of water. If you compare that to the superabsorbent that we had, the superabsorbent can absorb 14,880% of its weight in water. And we were really disappointed there. It wasn't nice. It wasn't a good day. So we said, well, let's go try and do something else. Let's go ahead and let's simulate what's going to hit a diaper. So we'll use a saline solution, 0.9%. And it's known that this salt solution actually reduces the effectiveness of the superabsorbent polymer. What we found out was that when we did it with the saline, there was no reduction in absorption for our foams. There was a significant reduction for the superabsorbent. And in fact, what we have is we've got a foam that's actually similar in properties and absorption with that saline material. That was really exciting. So we went from sad to real happy, and it was a nice day. Now, we were kind of confused, and we said, is this really true? And what the postdoc was doing was he was taking gels, adding the saline solution, measuring how much it absorbed, and then after that, he was putting them in an oven and drying off all the water. What we wanted to see was if any of our gel was solubilized in the water phase. Okay, so we were looking for weight losses. Well, he'd put it in the oven, and after the oven, he'd come back to me and said, well, it weighs about 20% more than when I actually dosed it into the water initially. And we started scratching our head and said, it can't weigh more. It just cannot weigh more. So what we said was, we'll repeat the experiment. We repeated it. We got the same 20% increase. What's going on? Same 20% increase. So we started to think about it. Well, what is actually happening there is that that material is acting as a salt collector. Okay? We measured the concentration of the bulk liquid. It had gone down. The salt concentration had gone down. What we had found out was that there was some kind of complex between the positive and negative charges in our gel and the sodium chloride. And we were actually desalinating the water. So his measurements were true. We found out that the ash contents of those materials that he took out of the oven were actually higher. And so basically, we proved in a couple different ways that we are absorbing salt. We have gels now that can absorb this much sodium chloride on a gram per gram basis with this sodium chloride concentration. Okay? So if you want to take our gel and take some brackish water, and we imagine that you have a pill of our gel and you put it in some brackish water, you do 2 applications and you can treat about 40 grams of water per 1 gram of our gel and get it down to drinkable. And we thought that was very interesting. We're still working on that. Another aspect is arsenic removal and heavy metals. We found that our gels actually can remove heavy metals from water, and we've done several different types. I'm just showing you arsenic here because it's so important. Basically, we know our metal loading, and we compared our materials to some commercial type materials. These materials are extremely expensive. Talking about tens of thousands of dollars per 100 grams. Then what we did was we did TOF sims, and we said, well, what's really going on here? And we were able to find the complexes of arsenic with some of the species that are in our gels. like the nitrogen and the oxygen. And we're doing further work right now to further explain how the structure of our gels will improve the efficiency of these. But anyway, what can happen is if you take that hemicellulose and you harvest it before you make ethanol with the cellulose and lignin, use the lignin as fuel, we can actually make a process more profitable. Okay. All right, third one, and then I'm done. Jesse's work on process modeling and based LCA of biofuels production. And what the difficulty in this project is what we're going to do is we're going to look at a gasification technology to make ethanol. And none of these exist industrially at this point right now. So what we want to do is, before the fact, try to learn something about the interaction of the environment and this process before actually any mill or unit operation has been put into the ground. And that's why we have this process modeling out front here. It's an important part of what we're doing. Okay, so one of the ways to convert biomass to ethanol is through a thermal conversion process. Okay, and what we do is we actually take that biomass and we gasify it. So we treat it at high temperature in an atmosphere that has a low amount of oxygen. Okay, so it's not going to combust in a normal way if we just burnt this in our fireplace. What will happen is we will generate things like carbon monoxide, hydrogen, and other materials that are upvalued. They're valuable gases. What we can do with those gases is we can clean them up, remove tar and pitch and things like that. It's a very important practical problem for this. Then we put it over a catalyst bed. We actually form alcohol, and then what we have to do is separate the alcohol. And we have ethanol and other higher alcohol products. But this is the process that we want to model and look at how significant it is in the environmental arena. So how do we do it? We establish system boundaries. Then we simulate it with material and energy balances. Very complicated. These material and energy balances have hundreds and hundreds of streams going from one operation to another. Each stream has 40 components, let's say. All of a sudden you're looking at a matrix of variables that are in the tens of thousands. And what we do is we can try to converge our energy and our material mass so that we get a good, accurate energy and material balance on our modeled process. Following that, the results of that, emissions and raw material inputs, go into life cycle assessment modeling equipment. And then we look at impact assessment. And I'm just going to show you an example of what we found and how we go about it. So first, LCA is a gate-to-gate modeling process. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to look at NREL has modeled this material, and they have a Aspen model, and getting it to run is not trivial. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to take 772,000 dry tons per year of biomass and convert it to ethanol using that model. Okay? So no full-scale plan exists currently, so that's why we have to resort to modeling. Okay, so for the gate-to-gate, we've got two boundaries here. This is the cradle-to-gate boundary, but in this case, we're just going to look at gate-to-gate. And what we're going to consider is the production part, landfilling of some of the waste emissions. We're going to look at the gaseous emissions and liquid emissions. We're going to look at the energy uses going in. So for now, just focus on these three circles right here. So that's a gate-to-gate. This gate to this gate right here. Okay. And our modeling results, what we're trying to do is look and evaluate different types of biomass. So we have forest biomasses and we've got energy crops. And our control or our standard is going to be hybrid poplar. So this is a hardwood. So basically for the poplar, we get 106 gallons per oven-dry ton of biomass coming in. And what we can see is for the other woods, for these two right here, we're getting a little bit higher on a gallon per ton, and this one a little bit lower. For the energy crops compared to the hybrid poplar, very significant decreases in the amount of ethanol we produce per ton of biomass. So that will come into play in the effectiveness of our process and the environmental impact. So we take our modeling outputs and we put them into the life cycle assessment, and then we try to understand, well, for instance, what is the greenhouse gas emissions? And for poplar, we get about 23 pounds of CO2 per gallon of ethanol. And for the hardwood, it's -4, -5, 2.8. A little bit less greenhouse gases, corn stover, switchgrass, miscanthus. So you can see that the type of biomass, based on the compositional differences, ash, water, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, all these things will affect the greenhouse gases.
Sorry, Rich, what does a negative number mean there?
A negative number would mean that it emits less greenhouse gases than the hybrid poplar.
Okay, so it's relative to the...
So it's relative to that 23. So if hybrid poplar emits 23 pounds, this is going to emit 4% less. Okay, so it's on percentage basis. Okay, and we can look at other variables that are important. Remember how I talked to you about handling and storage and moisture? Here's a great example. If our biomass comes in at 35% moisture, okay, our yield is going to be relatively high. And if it comes in at a higher moisture, because we need a lot more energy to dry it, our yield in gallons per oven dry ton goes from this value down to this value. So we're actually getting about a 12% decrease in our ethanol yield. That's going to have economic and environmental consequences. Greenhouse gases, well, it seems kind of innocuous that the water in there would affect the greenhouse gases, but it does. Basically, we can go for greenhouse gases from this level to this level right here. So it looks to me like it's about a 20% increase in greenhouse gases based on storage. And if you think about all the different operations that have to occur, the storage people are different from the conversion people. And those storage people might not understand why moisture is so important. But the conversion people will. And the communication is going to be pretty important. Okay. Now we also wanted to do, I'll give you an example of cradle to grave. This is going to be on the last example. Cradle to grave. Okay, so now what we want to do is just kind of say, this bioethanol that we're producing, from cradle to grave, how does it compare to gasoline, oil? Okay, and so what we had to do is we had to expand our system boundary. All our considerations here are the same as before, except for now we picked softwood chips. We're going to use softwood as opposed to all the different types of biomass. So we're going to focus in on softwood. All right. Now here's our new system boundary. It's much larger, and it includes all of the energy and the impacts of the raw materials and intermediate materials. So we're evaluating all of this. And we do the same thing for gasoline. Greenhouse gas emissions. So producing the raw material and getting it to our processing plant takes energy. It emits greenhouse gases, okay? And we've looked at the different operations and we tabulated them and looked at them as percentages, and that's all here in our analysis. And I'll just probably leave it at that. And here's a single score. We jumped many leaps to get here, made many assumptions. Some of them are subjective. Some of the things we've done are objective. Some are subjective. I will just tell you, we've left facts and data, and we've gone to that other place where there has been some emotion, some judgment, some subjective things. Nevertheless, I would like you to just consider this. So we have basically a single score for total environmental impact. Okay? Not the complete answer, and probably people in this audience know how to do this a lot better than I do. So I'm not claiming this is the end answer, but it's just something to talk about. So if we produce the ethanol, we basically have fossil fuels. We still use fossil fuels to accumulate our biomass. There's respiratory inorganics that are an issue. But the climate change, because we're taking carbon from our atmosphere, putting it into the fuel, at the gate where the fuel is leaving the processing plant, we have stored that carbon. So we can take a positive here. So this is the environmental impact for the ethanol. Gasoline, on the other hand, doesn't have that positive impact. Basically, we're consuming fossil fuels, and respiratory inorganics and the climate change are like that. So we can compare things, and this is just a starting point for us. This is definitely not the final destination, but we're going to use this methodology, and I wanted to introduce it to this group so that maybe discussions could be held in the future. All right, so let me just summarize, I think, what I wanted to get across to this group. Okay, first thing is biofuels are not a slam dunk, not like Duke University slam dunking NC State last night in basketball. It's not that easy. It's not that easy, okay? It's more like a half-court shot with 3 seconds left. There are enormous challenges, okay? And they're economic, they're social, they're cultural, lots of different things. The impact of a biofuel industry is really not known right now. there's not, I mean, we know a little bit about corn to ethanol, and a lot of the studies say it's good, and a lot of the studies say it's not so good, and there's questions about food and all that. We really don't know what a significant biofuel industry will do for us. It's just unknown. It's exciting. Basically, there's lots of different choices out there. There's biomass, there's technology for converting. We, in our department, we think we can filter out some of these and start to do good work on some that have really high potential. And that's what we're trying to do at NC State. Okay? So there should be some pathways where there should be some success. Maybe there's not, but we're hoping there are. Okay? NC State is active in all this stuff. We're willing partners. We collaborate with everyone. We're extending an invitation if we have a collaboration that's going to work for everybody. We love win-win situations. So think of us. Got a lot of different funding sources that have supported this research. They're all very interested in using our natural resources in a more effective way. And Jesse and Ronald aren't the only ones that worked on it. Abdus, Khalid, Jan, Laura, and James all have made really significant contributions to the group. And I couldn't have done it without them. Lots of good effort, good excitement over there, good people. And I'd like to answer any questions. Thank you. Thanks for your attention.